Hello, Suvaros Minahan, host of Talk Cosmos, a weekly panel astrological conversations. And today is Nowchat, March 23, 2021. And it's a follow up to yesterday's Nowchat with Sara Stromley, who's part of the Moonbeam team and also has her own brainbodytherapy.com uh, website. And we've been talking about the Asian shooting that occurred on the 16th. And this follow up is to show the consciousness, further consciousness as it involves the United States because of the Confederate chart and how it relates also to the United States chart. But going back to this chart that was on the 16th at 4:50 p.m. in Atlanta was a Confederate chart that's from Nick Campion's World Charts, February 4th, 1861, time unknown in Montgomery. And we showed a lot of issues, but I think as a follow-up that I want to kick off our conversation with is the fact that the real elements of stereotype thinking that with this consciousness depicted here by the exterior chart of the Confederate chart from the moment that right now with the nodes as they are in communicative Gemini and belief system righteous, possibly, on the shadow side of Sagittarius, that and Gemini also from the shadow side of gossiping or of doing through the language misrepresenting, as we're seeing with its ruler right now in Pisces of that chart, the possible misrepresentation through stereotyping and not letting the individuality that's so important in this chart, because as we had said yesterday, of its emphasis with Uranus, which we can get to later. But that was how I wanted to introduce my thoughts that kind of connect our second.
Yeah, I think also the Gemini emphasis on this really, it was interesting to me how the community support and the Senate hearing to bring awareness to this 150% spike in the last year of hate crimes against Asians. The platform seemed to be overtaken by those very outspoken about cancel culture and their feelings and their need to their beliefs that this isn't a real crime against Asians, like their dismissal of it and the de-emphasis of their need and their platform of being, canceled.
Condoning this. Yes, exactly.
And how they're
And what
being,
I like, well, if I may say, what I really like here, Sara, is that this is an example of data, more data that's very necessary in the Gemini sense here. And that's showing on the negative side what data, but yes, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the right words. I had them there for a second, but there's the delusion of this. There's also a very significant Neptune return that's happening. That's kind of in a square.
Well, will be in the next
squaring
5
by
years.
sign, but yeah, it's with an orb.
Well,
and
it is.
It's
on its path.
But that's about principles. It's about idealism and over identification and inflated, some inflation of information that
no boundaries. That's right.
Yeah. So there can be some.
Well, absolutely. And I think too, with the San Bernardino studies, as you had said, 16 cities that showed that although Black and Latino hatred crimes were down, that the Asian had spiked 149%.
It just seemed to be redirected towards Asian.
Hey, what's happening is this floating scapegoat need of hatred to externalize as blame on some other condition. So going back to the rhetoric of this, the hatred bully situation, that there isn't any, it doesn't allow the individuality. That's right.
Yeah, there
And
was, yeah, the leadership, the Senate captain or the sheriff's captain in there was first, um, there was a lot of anger at his reaction, basically playing this off as sexual frustration and someone having a bad day. So
horrible.
it was very insensitive to the victims.
Yes.
It delegitimized the nature of the crime, and it also just it didn't take it it lessened the significance of the victims in their case. They were slandered and misrepresented as sex workers
Yes.
in this case.
It's really manipulation, as we can see here with the event that here in the sixth house with Pluto, which is, as we have in the next year, a Pluto return, thinking of our need for transforming our structures in many ways. But here it's so closely in orb of their value system. Yes, that it's a manipulation. It's revealing that manipulation. I totally agree with that. You had brought up also, I want to bring up, because we're emphasizing some of the Gemini, the data that's necessary that we need to retrieve, the historical, that it also represents the
Yeah, the Confederacy kind of represents the South, and there's been a number of locations that it's come to light of these plantations that have been throughout the South that are tourist locations. And in many of these locations, the tour guides will actually downplay the severity of the slavery that was done there. They paint the plantation owners as loving their slaves and taking care of them and almost a parental role and need of their care, which was a very one-sided story. They were slaves. They weren't paid anything. They were beaten to submission and separated from their families, and in many cases, and
well, it's
yeah, it's just
absolutely.
it's a terrible narrative, and
So
it's a
another,
terrible way to educate people, and they're taking hundreds of thousands of
that's the point.
federal tax-paying dollars.
That's the point. In a bad
And
story that's not representing all the
yeah,
voices.
weaves a terrible narrative, and there's a lot of narrative that's been kind of whitewashed out of history books that are in our
And we need to
public
listen. We
education
need to
system
open
too.
up. We need to open up and listen to the values and the conversations. And that was indicative of it. I know I keep flipping between these two charts because
And
this is
one
the
thing I did
DS
want to
chart.
mention, one thing about the one of the things that I never learned about until this whole incident and researching it was one of the worst civil rights atrocities in US history was the enactment of the Asian exclusion that happened it was actually passed into law on May 6th, 1882. They rationalized restriction and movement and discrimination against Asians in this country.
Because of the railroad. Yes, after bringing in all these people
And
in order
yeah,
to fulfill it, then they didn't want anybody. It's again an example of this kind of consciousness that this chart, the Confederate chart, which was at our uh, uh, Uranus return, is indicative of a consciousness that we need to become aware of. That's what Uranus wants. That's a very good example.
and yeah, I mean, even though that it was dismissed, it kept getting reenacted over and over
Yeah.
and over again over the next century. So again, the shooting chart kind of was the tipping point for the awareness of abuses of Asians in our country. That's why I like this chart.
Well, it's indicative, I think, of a wide stemmed uh, course correction that through the nodal emphasis of communicating outside of the stereotypes, we can begin to find hopefully some wholeness as the authentic homeland for many communities that can live together and you with different ideas. Okay, well, this is second part. Our timing is up. Thank you. Do subscribe and connect with Sara Stromley and myself. And we'll see you Saturday. And that was okay. Thank you.
Thank you.